Well, I'd like to welcome everyone to another Fireside Adoptee Fire Speaker Series interview. We're really excited to have Bruce Porth with us today. Bruce is a baby scoop era adoptee like myself, born in the 1960s, adopted into a middle-class family, a well-intentioned family, but not necessarily aware of how to raise an adopted child. And perhaps he'll speak about that in a little bit here. But Bruce found that he had encountered trouble in childhood with undiagnosed or untreated anxiety and depression, didn't really know where things like that were coming from. Whether there was a connection to adoption was not something that was ever brought up in anything that he was pursuing at the time. But he did come out of the fog in the late 1990s. He's reunited with birth family. We'll be talking a little bit about that. And Bruce is someone you'll find has a deep passion for promoting truth and transparency in adoption. And again, we're just very excited and honored to have you here, Bruce, and welcome to Fireside Adoptees. It's good to have you.
Thank you, Greg. It's really an honor to be here. It's an honor to have this group of people here to listen and to support this process. It's really a gift to have these adoptee-only spaces, to share in like this, and it means a lot to me. So, thanks for asking me.
Absolutely. I have had the great fortune of being able to speak with Bruce in person and have found such depth and engagement and conversation that it really felt something that I was compelled to do was try to bring your voice into the community, Bruce, because you're doing great things. There are people and connections you have and a perspective that you have that is wonderful and unique. And we'll be speaking a little bit later about particularly the male adoptee voice and where is it and why do we not hear so much from men in this community. But again, very, very honored to have you here. I'd like to start with some biographical information, if we could, on you. So you also are a baby scoop era adoptee, born, I think, in the mid to late 60s, like myself. But what was your experience like growing up as an adoptee, and when did you actually find out about being adopted?
So the experience growing up as an adoptee, it was extremely difficult, but a lot of my experience was completely unconscious during my childhood years and adolescence. So it really wouldn't make sense to me until I entered into adulthood, and unfortunately by that time a lot of damage had been done, a lot had been missed, many missed opportunities for connection and for healing. So the experience growing up was definitely challenging. And so just a little bit of background. I was born in 1967, and I was born to my mom was 16 years old. My birth father was 19 at the time. And it was, very clear from early on that she would not be allowed to keep me. She was a junior in high school. And I continue to find out new information about my family, which is wonderful. But quite late to be finding out some of these things. But my birth father had dropped out of high school and then returned, and that's how he got connected to my mom. And so it was in January, February of 1967 when she went off to the Booth Memorial Hospital in Chicago. And so was there for 2 to 3 months before she gave birth to me. So my name at birth was Brian Keith Swanson, and the Brian Keith came from the Rolling Stones. Brian Jones and Keith Richards. Being a teenager in the 60s, that was a pretty predominant influence at the time. And as it happens, I'm really not a fan of the Rolling Stones, but it's kind of a cool namesake,
Sure.
I suppose. And so I was adopted through Lutheran Social Services. And after I was in 10 days of foster care, a period of time that I really don't know what kind of care I was getting. Um,
Right.
I did find in my non-identifying information eventually when I got that there was a note there from my foster mother to my adoptive mother,
Oh, wow.
about a lot of details about my sleeping pattern and eating and things like that. I had my days and nights completely mixed up, and I still do,
Mm,
and which it drives my wife a little bit crazy. Um, but yeah, so um, that was how it came to be. And in terms of finding out when I was adopted, um, I was apparently told when I was very young that I was adopted by my mom, my adoptive mom. And I have absolutely no recollection of that at all. But according to her, the line that I got was, "You were adopted, and that's special." So it fits this predominant narrative from that era, and perhaps even now. That adoption is something that we're supposed to be grateful for. It's a beautiful thing. It's
yeah.
based in love, and adopted children are special, chosen, and lucky. And my ultimately my experience was quite the opposite of that. So that's all pretty abstract thinking. I have no idea what it means. She's telling it to me in probably a very jovial, positive tone of voice. So
Yeah.
I really don't understand the context of it. I think when I look back on it, probably when I really felt like I was told that I was adopted was in a sandbox, with
Mm,
a neighbor, a couple of neighbor kids. And one of the neighbor kids knew that I was adopted and told me that I was adopted, um, but not using the same tone of voice that my mom had, presumably used. And so I, uh, I was devastated
yeah.
and, was distraught and confused. And I ran home and I asked my adoptive mom if this was true. And now I'm totally convinced that on some level I knew it was true, because as Nancy very points out, I was there when it happened. Um, it
Right.
may not be in explicit memory, but it's definitely there in implicit memory. And so I got confirmation, yes, that I was adopted, and there was, despair and confusion, and I had a bunch of questions that I started asking. And I can even picture where I was, in our family room when I was asking these questions, and my mom was at the sink, prepping dinner, doing dishes or something, and she had no answers, to my questions. And that was, perhaps understandable, but what was really devastating was that she didn't seem to have any compassion for the despair I was displaying at the
Wow.
time. And so it became very apparent that my questions were hurting her. And so I realized that I could not bring this topic up. And it really never came up again, until I started doing some recovery work. And then, later, towards the end of her life, I was really wanting to have an honest conversation about adoption with her. And it felt like I had to build up this huge head of steam, in order just to broach the word, just to say the word on the phone with her. And I would get trite answers like, we loved you as if you were our own. And I think that in reality I didn't want to be loved as if I was their own, because that wasn't reality. um,
Yeah.
I wanted to be loved as if I wasn't their own. and for them to honor, the reality of that, and honor the bond that I had with my birth family and that identity as well. And there was none of that that was available to me in that dialogue. And so she passed away in 2020 on my birthday, coincidentally, and we never really got to have that honest conversation that I really wanted. And ideally, Anne Heffron has mentioned this once, and it really hit me, deep in the chest, that really what she wanted from her adoptive mom was the same thing I wanted from mine, was, to just fall into her arms, as a kid, and grieve the loss of my birth mom. And that of course happens very rarely, if ever, in these situations. So so that's that's kind of how I found out.
Yeah, there are so many parallels with my own experience that it's almost breathtaking to hear somebody else talk about nearly the same things and the same perspective that I had, including that although I kept hearing it didn't matter to them and I was viewed the same, that I needed to know it was okay to be different. And so I very strongly resonate with everything you've shared here. And thank you for that vulnerability, Bruce. That was was for me particularly engaging because, like I said, coming out of the same era as you, I'm only 2 years younger than you, having my parents be very similar in age to your own in terms of my biological parents, and the experience you had in foster care and the way they said they told you earlier, all of that resonates with me, and I didn't absorb it either the same way. So I wanted to let you know that that's very much maybe it's something well understood among other baby scoop era adoptees, but it certainly is something for me. Were there any other siblings in your house growing up?
Yes, there were. I had a sister who was natural to my adoptive parents. And as often happens in these cases, she came along 10 months after I arrived. So I arrived as a result of infertility, and then I cured them of that issue. And I have had some, I was able to have some conversations around my arrival with my adoptive mom before she did pass away. And, found out that she was in a pretty, deep state of depression around that time. She had some losses of a previous fiance and her father. Prior to that, some other issues going on. And she said when I came along, not only did I cure her infertility, but also seemed to cure her depression. So I should also mention too that in all of this process, my adoptive dad was pretty much nowhere to be seen. He was there in the family, but there was an emotional shallowness and a vacancy, of thought and feeling in him that made it impossible to bond. I think from what I heard, he was the first one to pick me up when I arrived, and he promptly handed me to my adoptive mom.
Mm-hmm.
And that sort of is a metaphor for how our relationship unfolded.
Set the tone for the whole thing.
Yeah, and we were, pretty much estranged because he never felt like a safe person for me to be around. As I got older, he would visit with my mom, but there was really no real relationship there, unfortunately.
I'm drawn by something you said here about the cure for infertility and depression, and what a huge burden that is to place on a child. Were you aware growing up that you had been a solution to that, or did that come to you later as a realization?
No, that was I mean, that was well into adulthood before I came to that awareness. I mean, it was also kind of a shock too, to still have, a lot of early childhood development needs, at 10 months old, and to have another, um, you know, sibling arrive at that time too. So,
Yeah.
and a big part of my work is working with that, those unmet early developmental needs.
And unfortunately, you've said that in the more extended biography or autobiography I received from you, that there was an instance of untreated depression, anxiety, etc., in your life growing up, and you had no knowledge that anything might be connected to being an adopted person. Were there any resources made available to you for coping with that, or was it all internal that you just felt like you had to keep it to yourself?
Yeah, it was all internal. I survived by stuffing feelings, and dissociating. Um, I really think that in terms of what my nervous system experienced, it was as if, two babies had arrived at that house, when I was adopted by them. And one was promptly put into the closet and got no attention, no love, no light, no food, um, no kind of nourishment. And and that is sort of the process of dissociation. The only way I could survive, from the intense experience that that part of me had, was to dissociate from it. And yet, those early developmental needs, those intense feelings, they never go away. So they continue to knock at the door. So the anxiety and depression would manifest in different ways as I was growing up. And probably the first example that I can think of was, I started pre-kindergarten when I was 4 years old. And on that first day of school, my impulse was to just cling to the fence outside the school. And that's exactly what I did. And so I was not going to budge either. And so the teacher stood on one side of the fence, and my mom held me from behind, and the teacher pried my fingers open one by one,
Wow.
until I was liberated from the fence. And then she threw me over her shoulder and carried me into the classroom. And that, I seem to recall that was part of the process for a few weeks there of me getting into that classroom, was, um, her throwing me over her shoulder and carrying me in. So yeah, so that's one example. When I was in second grade, there was one day when I just showed up in school, and I just kept saying over and over again, I want my mommy, I want my mommy, I want my mom. And so, eventually the teacher talked to the principal, and they called my adoptive mom, who came in. And we went down to the teacher's lounge, and she promptly said, that I mean, in my adult language, suck it up and get back to class. And nobody ever recognized that, that the mother that I was asking for may not have been her.
Yeah.
And I certainly had no awareness or ability to articulate that, and or even be aware of it.
And as I heard you say it, that was the first thing that came to my mind was your natural mother. And I think for many adoptees, we probably, our minds immediately go there and hear that wail from a child for their mother.
Right. I think, and a lot of that may or may not have to do with, the bonding that happens in utero. I think in hindsight, I had a strong sense that my mom really didn't want to relinquish me. In fact, I know that now, post reunion, and so there was just this, this expectation of this continuum of care being followed through upon birth. And so when that was ruptured, by the relinquishment, it was all the more devastating to me. to my nervous system anyway,
Sure.
which had these kind of higher expectations based on my in utero experience. I don't know if science can prove that or not. I do know other adoptees who have had the opposite experience, where they have, they suspect that they sense that their mothers had made the decision early on. They're very clear about it, and they were totally planning on relinquishing. And so in utero, they might have gotten the message, oh, I guess I'm on my own. Let's, adapt to that now. So, and then 5th grade, I was out of school for 3 weeks because of, quote unquote, stomach issues. And it was really anxiety. At the time, we had our desk set up in groups in the classroom, and I was feeling a lack of a sense of belonging there within my group. I think, and it triggered a lot of my abandonment trauma, and so my my nervous system took over and started shutting down. And it my mom took me to the doctor. They really didn't know what to do. They gave me a shot, which I passed out from, which was a little bit re-traumatizing, I think, as well. So eventually I gradually got more comfortable with it, but there was other traumatization there as well. Like, my mom decided, well, I can't seem to get him to go back to class. Maybe let's let a neighbor. And so a neighbor mom tried to do it. And I remember having one hand gripping a fire hydrant out in front of the school, and this neighbor mom pulling me by my other hand to try to get me, to go into the classroom. So, clearly I was saying a lot with my behavior there that nobody was, picking up on. Yeah. So, I mean, and it would, it would manifest in other ways. And it, the anxiety still continues to manifest in various ways. It plays out in my, relationship with my wife and my kids a lot. Sometimes the relationship, that I have with my work, if I'm feeling particularly challenged, I can go to a space of real inferiority and a place where I feel like I just have absolutely no value whatsoever. And all those survival mechanisms, kind of kick in.
I'm glad you mentioned how it can affect even beyond our interpersonal relationships, but also the sense of self-worth we have sometimes in our profession. Even when we're highly trained and skilled and competent and experienced, we can still be reduced really quickly to feeling like, I don't know what I'm doing. I can't do this. I'm overwhelmed. I'm going to shut down. So I wonder if that's similar to what you've experienced as well.
Yeah, certainly there's, this imposter syndrome that directly related to, my adoption trauma. And sometimes it's, it's pretty challenging, and I mean, so far I've been able to get through it, but there are times when I show up at work and my prefrontal cortex is just nowhere to be found.
Yeah.
And that triggers all kinds of fears around survival. And, I have these spears resting on my shoulder of, college tuition and mortgage and car payments. And, it's like, if I can't function at work, then what?
Yes. I've been there.
How do we manage all of that? And I mean, the wonderful thing is I have always found the support that I need. And, a lot of these, spaces that I have to move through feel like brick walls. And, brick walls of unlovability, or what I've more recently called non-negotiable unlovability, because it feels impenetrable sometimes. And the truth is, they're not non-negotiable. There are ways to move through them. And, I think it's with finding the adoptee community, it has really brought me to a new level of being able to do my work. And, there's challenges associated with that. I think, I do internal family systems therapy, and part of that model is that we have exiles, and parts of us that we've dissociated from through the years that carry these burdens of extreme feelings and beliefs. And it's been interesting, really leaning into the adoptee community, because I think a lot of these exiles that I just really didn't even know that I had started realizing that there was a way out. And so, if you think in terms of a dungeon where these exiles are held, there was this rush for the stairs, to get up out of the dungeon. And so lots of feelings, lots of beliefs coming into consciousness. And, the beauty of it is that, yes, this kind of work is challenging. It's a lot to deal with, but there's an equal amount of support available to me, to move through it.
That's really inspiring to hear and reassuring. And we haven't talked a lot in our group about internal family systems. Maybe a good conversation for us eventually to have here in Fireside. Can I ask you real quickly about the relationship with your sister? Did you feel any disparity in how she was treated by your parents versus how you were?
No, I mean, I think I probably felt it. But I think my parents did a pretty good job of trying to balance things out. I mean, for Christmas, I remember there was a period of time when we were very young where it was vitally important that we both got the same number of presents at Christmas. And my mom would diligently, meet that expectation. Yeah, I mean, it's that relationship continues to evolve, I think, and I feel like I'm at a transition point with it,
Hmm.
and I'm not quite sure where it's going to go. But I was steeped in this environment growing up where the topic of adoption was taboo,
Right.
and for many, many years, I projected that onto my adoptive sister as well. That there was really no space or capacity there to be, like come out of the closet, so to speak, or be my authentic self
Right.
in that relationship. And since both parents had passed away, it's starting to feel like, to me, like I could go there, and so I'm just. I mean, this is an awareness that has just kind of come up for me in the past couple of months, and it would be such. I mean, I get emotional sometimes when I think about it, because it would be such a relief to merge these two worlds that have always felt so dissociated. Again, because there was no discussion of adoption in my family, that part of me that got locked away in the closet early on, was really sealed away, for a long time. And it was interesting in my reunion to hear my birth mom talk about, and then my her sister as well, talk about that time period when she was going away to Booth Memorial Hospital, because her initial plan was to go in January, but there was this blizzard that happened, and so it got postponed by a week or two before she could go there. And one of the things I had grown up with in my family was slideshows, and one of the a set of slides that we would always see would be of that same blizzard, and my adoptive dad sitting in a lawn chair with a glass of wine in a big giant snowdrift. That was unprecedented for Chicago, at that time. And when I heard the story of that same very snowstorm coming from this other, previously entirely dissociated part of me. It was like these two worlds were colliding. Like, oh my gosh, like that's the same storm.
Yes.
It's, I mean, it may come across as sounding kind of silly, but for me, it was, to reclaim that. It was a part of the process of me reclaiming that dissociated part of me, or parts of me.
Yeah.
And so it felt really significant for me. So in my relationship with my sister, that's what I'm hoping I can do, is bring both of these worlds together, because as an adoptee, it is such a burden, and it is such a consumption of emotional energy to try to keep these two worlds separate. And I felt like for so many years that it was an imperative that I do that, because it felt like if I even broached the subject, that it would put the family into a tailspin, and I could likely be set back. Even
It's,
as a 15-year-old, I was thinking that. I remember thinking, oh my, they could still send me back.
oh, wow. Yeah. So you live this exhausting life of keeping everything in compartments and
Right.
not allowing the overlap, like strenuously, assiduously avoiding the overlap. But now, and I hear this a lot with adoptees, once the adoptive parents have passed, a lot of people feel like maybe my worlds can come together at last, which shows, I think, the magnitude of obligation that so many of us live under, that we can't live that way under the circumstances of still trying, in a sense, to please adoptive parents, even well into our adulthood. And when they pass, I know that for a lot of people, it can be, I hate to use the word liberating, but liberating, right? There's a freedom that wasn't there, I think, for a lot of people.
Right. Well, that loyalty is a trauma response.
Right.
And I remember feeling that loyalty intensely, and that was a loyalty to everybody except myself. To actually be loyal to my truth felt absolutely unavailable to me.
So how does this relate to the experience of coming out of the fog for you? When did that happen? Was any of this connected, these realizations?
Yeah. Coming out of the fog, that's a kind of a charged phrase in the adoptee community, and I absolutely love that phrase because it's
So do
so
I.
descriptive. But I want to make it very, very clear that in using that phrase, I'm not othering anybody else. That I believe that we're all on the continuum of coming out of the fog. This wound, at least from my perspective, is so massive. And as I step further and further into it, I realize how big and deep and profound it is. And so I believe that I will always be coming out of the fog. Yeah, so for me, I think it happened over, like I said, it's going to continue to unfold for me. But even, going back in time, there were periods of time when I realize now it was a coming out of the fog event, but I wasn't totally aware of it. When I was a freshman in college, I hit an emotional bottom the first year, being out on my own, for the first time out of that family system, but still kind of tangled in it. There was so much that I had dissociated from, so many parts of myself that were buried, and those came flooding back to me, that first year. And I was sucked into a darkness and a despair that I had no context for it. I had no idea, no way to understand it.
Right.
And it was somewhat re-traumatizing because I didn't have language to describe it. And so that was my first experience with trying to get therapy. And, first I found myself in the college library in the psychology section trying to, figure it out myself, not knowing what I had really stepped into. and that it was really, like somebody says here in the chat, this is a lifetime of work. I'm not going to go to the library, get a book, and sort this out, by 6 p.m. tonight. So eventually I found my way to the school counselor, one of the school counselors, who was this wonderful, gentle, caring man. And I was really shut down. I would come sometimes and I just wouldn't say anything. And, at one point he said, is this really valuable for you? Because it doesn't seem like it is, and maybe we should discontinue it. And I remember almost like jumping to my feet and yelling, no, absolutely not. I needed to just sit in the presence, of somebody that was safe. There was such a feeling of terror inside of me, and I was clinging. I was desperately clinging for anything that resembled safety, and he represented that. And then at one point he also, somehow I disclosed that I was adopted, and at one point, he asked me if I thought that any of what I was going through at the time may have had anything to do with being adopted. And I said, with complete determination and fierceness, absolutely not.
Yeah.
So there were, there were knocks on the door of coming out of the fog, but they went unanswered. I just couldn't get there. There was another very powerful experience when I was in graduate school, and I went on to grad school, I think, in part because I liked the field I was in, but I was also, pretty terrified to step out into the world, on my own. And
Lengthen the runway a little more, right?
Yeah. And I found a wonderful community of fellow grad students. And one of the things we did was we would go see movies every Tuesday night. And there was a movie that we happened to see, and I never knew, what the choice was going to be ahead of time. But we saw this old movie called Immediate Family with Glenn Close and James Woods. It's about an open adoption. And I remember sitting in that theater, like probably 20 minutes into it, realizing what it was about and being completely shocked by the emotional reaction that I was having. I was having to bite the insides of my cheeks to keep myself from just sobbing. And and then I think it was maybe a couple or a few weeks after that, where I was leaving the bar with my group of friends, and one of my friends, she and I were parked in a different area. We stopped and we started talking, and for whatever reason, it felt safe enough for me to, for the very first time, disclose on an emotional level, how I felt about being adopted and the fact that I was adopted.
Oh.
And that was a pretty significant coming out of the fog experience for me. And here we are, sitting on the cement wall adjacent to a parking garage in the middle of this, little town that I went to school in, and I'm sobbing for like an hour, and she's totally there for me. And the other thing about that story is I walked into my office the next morning and there was a single rose in a vase.
Oh, wow.
And so I don't want to be overly dramatic, but she may have saved my life that evening. Not necessarily in that moment, but further down the road, because what I really took away from that, not necessarily consciously, but perhaps unconsciously, is that love exists. Because there was a part of me that was deeply embedded in the belief that love just doesn't exist. That's what that part of me that got locked away in the closet, that's what his experience was and still is to some extent. That's what I'm bringing my healing work to.
It's amazing. How did going into reunion affect you, Bruce? What was that experience like?
It was like a lot of adoptees experience it and describe it. I always hear the word surreal, and it was surreal. So yeah, back in the 90s, I was in a pretty significant relationship that ended, and it was really the first time that I felt, deeply in love. And going into it, I never even anticipated that this could possibly end.
Mm.
That was just like off the radar for me. Like I never even fathomed that. And it was a kind of relationship that burned really hot, but only for a fairly short period of time, slightly less than a year. And Greg, I want to be mindful of time.
We're doing okay.
Okay.
Yeah, I appreciate that, but we're okay. As long as you're okay with the time, then
I'm good.
yeah, okay. But thanks for asking.
And so when that relationship ended, it was devastating, and like more devastating than just the end of a relationship. Like I realized there were other components to this, and I remember I was spending a lot of time skiing around that time. I had this awareness on a ski lift once that I was just astonished that a human being could be experiencing this much pain and still just be physically alive. Like it boggled my mind. But it was shortly after that relationship ended that, for whatever reason, consciously it hit me, I need to find my mom. And I don't even remember consciously thinking that up until that point in time.
Mm-hmm.
It felt like it was such it was a choice that was so far off the table because of my experience, growing up, that I never fully considered it. And now it was imperative that I find my mom. And so I didn't tell anybody, except, a few of my closest friends in my recovery community. And so I went about the process, and, starting with my non-identifying information, and I, wrote to the circuit court in Illinois to try to get whatever information I could get there. And I did get my adoption decree from them, which shockingly had this big stamp on it that said that the document was impounded. Yeah, it was really, really quite shocking to see the lengths to which, the state goes to abolish that previous identity. And to me, now it is absolutely appalling, and I'm going to do everything I can to, eliminate this from this whole process. But and I was able to, from that document, I think that we have angels on the inside, because they whited out the, identifying information on this adoption decree, but I could read it. So I saw that my last name was my mom's last name was Swanson, and but a very popular Midwestern name. And so this was really pre-internet days. I had found some resources online at the time, which there was an internet mailing list called AIML, Adoptee's Internet Mailing List, and it was a way to kind of, it was not a chat, it wasn't in real time, but people would post things, and then you could, go back and read the posts later on. I have no idea how I found this. I don't even consciously remember looking for it, but I was there, and I felt like I didn't have the resources to find my mom, and I had been reading about this guy who did amazing things as far as searching, and so I reached out to him and paid him $375, and within 3 days he came back to me apologizing for it taking so long and providing me with so much information about not only my mom but my whole maternal birth family. Including like birth certificate numbers and birth dates, and my three half siblings' birth dates, current and previous addresses, and a previous spouse. A scary amount of information, And so I sat on that information for a good 6 months. I had the wherewithal to take my time. And this is before reunion was like a thing that we prepared for.
Mm.
You know, it was, we were just kind of out there with it. And so it was around my 30th birthday, and I drafted a letter to my mom and put it in the mail that would coincide with it arriving at her house on or about my 30th birthday. And so she got it. And then I waited patiently, and I think it wasn't a week or maybe 2 weeks that I got a letter back. And around that time, I would, I would ski through the winter, but at the ski areas around here, once they closed, there was still enough snow, and you could hike up the mountain and ski down. So I didn't open the letter when I got it. I waited until the weekend, and I hiked up to the top of this mountain, and sat there on this balcony in a ski patrol hut, and I read the first letter, the first contact that I ever got from my mom, and she was very open, very receptive, and so we started the reunion process with that. And that led to a visit, the following summer, or I think it was a year and a half from there. And so I met her. I just remember, walking up to the door, and that literal feeling of it being so surreal. And so, yeah, she has a twin sister. So I met the both my mom and my aunt, and then my three half siblings, and we went to lunch. And I mean, one of the memorable things is trying to dialogue with my mom. We were out at lunch because I kept having to repeat my questions. She was like listening, but she wasn't hearing me. And in hindsight, I totally understand that was likely just a sense of disbelief on her part, that I was sitting right there in front of her. And it was just taking a little extra effort for her to take in my presence. And so, so we started, so we built a relationship. She was, amazing. She was, completely afraid that I was going to hate her. And actually, I think that there's some truth to that. I think there is some baby rage that I still have to work with, that I tend to project onto significant other women in my life, unfortunately. That's a whole separate story, and that's part of my healing work that I'm doing. But it was, such a gift to have her. She would buy me gifts for holidays and my birthday that were just spot on. Like, she just knew me.
Yeah.
She would always, for clothes, she would buy me exactly what I wanted. And so it was a good reunion. And she, I was having my first daughter at the time, around that time, or shortly after, and she loved being a grandmother. So I was looking forward to this unfolding reunion process. And it was in just about 20 years ago, I got a call on January 22nd of 2023 from my aunt, who said that there was a house fire, and that my mom had died in the fire, and that one of my half brothers was in the hospital with severe burns because he had left a lit cigar on the couch and went out. And when he came back, the house was engulfed in flames, and he desperately tried to find our mom and get her out of the house. And ended up getting burned and having to jump from the second story window. It's interesting sharing that story in a room full of other adoptees.
Yeah.
Because a lot of times I will mention that to various people and I won't feel it. And now I can really feel it. When I got that phone call, I did not feel a thing. There was no grief. There was nothing. It would take me 10 years to start to feel the loss, the death of my mom, but also the loss of her. I could not feel anything around the death of her because I was still so numbed out from the loss of her, at birth. So, it's been quite a journey with all of this. The wonderful gift that continues is that I have a really close relationship with my mom's twin sister, and she has given me, so much love and so much information, and the information feels like vital to me. When I found my mom, really, I mean, we know reunion doesn't heal us.
Right.
There's so many, neural structures that are all, so deeply, established in our nervous systems, in our bodies, that just the act of reunion is not going to undo those. But I learned something extremely significant and meaningful for me at the time, which was that it wasn't that I was not wanted. It was that I couldn't have been kept.
Oh, that's profound.
And that's it. It's what I desperately needed at that time in my life, because I was heavily burdened by this, deep penetrating belief that I just wasn't wanted, and that I was, actually hated. And I when I met her, and then continuing, with getting information from my Aunt Deb, I find out that she never wanted to relinquish me. That she and my aunt, as kids, would plot, as I say, unkidnapping me, coming to find me, and their mom got word of that, just totally put the kibosh on it, and I heard that she made birthday cakes for me on my birthday. Um, there were just lots of stories, that contradicted that early messaging that I felt. And, my aunt tells me that when my mom came back from the hospital after giving birth to me, she just sobbed, sobbed, sobbed. She was inconsolable. And her twin, my aunt, was the only supportive resource that she had around that. And she found a picture of a little baby with blonde hair, pinned it up on her bulletin. Um, she didn't have any actual pictures of me, unfortunately. So, yeah, so, reunion continues for me to grow and expand, in my relationship with my aunt. And my half siblings, they don't seem all that interested in having a relationship. And that's fine too. I've got 3 other aunts as well. Well, 2 in addition to my mom's twin. I don't have much of a relationship with them, but just recently did ancestry DNA, and I'm entering that whole world, and that has more to do with my birth father. But one of my other aunts has this really elaborate family tree, which I just saw last week, and it was just shocking to see that I actually have roots.
Yeah.
There's roots.
Came from somewhere.
Yeah.
If you've seen any of my reactions to what you've said. I'm kind of glad you kept talking, because I wouldn't have been able to speak from the emotion I felt
Thanks, Greg.
in what you've shared. So I wanted to conclude by asking you this, which is, you have such a powerful voice. Why do you think it is we don't hear from more male adoptees in our community?
So I think grief is hard.
Yeah.
And I think grief may be harder for men than it is for women. Anger may be harder for women than it is for men. But this is the culture that we're steeped in. And so, I love connecting with other adoptee men. And I know there's groups out there that do more than I'm doing, that I haven't even had the time, or the energy yet to connect with. But I'm part of a men's group. Unfortunately, it meets only once a month through Adoption Knowledge affiliates, and it's a chance for men to connect and talk about our feelings around this really challenging issue and this lifelong work. And nothing gets in the way of that meeting for me.
Yeah.
And my family knows that now. Like, don't even expect me to do anything different and miss that meeting. Unfortunately, there are times in that meeting where there's only two of us. I think at most we've had six. So I think there's a long way to go. For me, part of my recovery path has involved being, somewhat involved in the so-called men's movement, and listening to lots of Robert Bly tapes through the years. And he was an amazing guy. He passed away recently, but and one of the things he says is that the pathway to a man's feelings is through grief. And but it's not always that accessible to us. I know from my own experience, I needed a lot of safety in order to access my feelings. I just could not go there unless I knew that it was safe. And I'm able, to find that safety now within communities of other men. Now, most of my life, I have gravitated to women. And that may be partly due, to the relationship I had with my own father, that I gravitated to my mom to show me how to feel. And that led me into some trouble, because I, trying to feel like from a female standpoint, just it wasn't true to my nature. But I lacked any, kind of real modeling there. And my birth father, turned out to be someone who was profoundly untrustworthy as well. So I'm hoping, I'm getting more involved in Adoption Knowledge affiliates, and want to get more involved in their peer support activity, and try to rally more men, and invite them into this process. I kind of laugh at that, because it's, from the outside, it probably doesn't look that appealing. There's lots of pain there. I work with someone who's adopted, and just doesn't, he's done DNA, didn't really get any strong matches, and just doesn't even want to go any deeper than he has, which is really not too far in terms of understanding the trauma. And I think that's typical for a lot of male adoptees.
I'd like to say that, first of all, it's been a complete honor to speak with you, and to hear your openness and vulnerability in ways that we don't always hear. So very meaningful for me, and very much appreciate your time and that we got to hear your stories. I know you, when we talked about setting up the interview, I really think I do want to do this now, and that you hadn't had your story out there before, but I can assure you that a lot of people are going to feel this very deeply. So thank you for your openness and honesty here, Bruce. And just want to know if you have one or two final words here before we close the interview.
Well, just thank you, Greg, for the platform. I mean, these adoptee spaces are just, so vital to me. And as I have heard in the past, we need each other like we need oxygen. And I'm a fan of a lot of podcasts, and I sometimes say that I'm a fan of this or that podcast in the same way that I'm a fan of gravity. It's something that's essential, and gravity is a good analogy because without it, I feel completely untethered. If I go too long without connecting with my adoptee community, I really start to feel a bit off track. And which is astonishing because, like, not too long ago, I remember telling a friend of mine who was an adopted parent that I didn't really even identify as adopted anymore because I had already done a bunch of work around it.
Oh.
Just the testament to the depth of the dissociation and the denial that comes with this kind of trauma. So, I guess if I were to say one last thing to the adoptee community is, this work is hard, but don't waste time looking for an easier world. This is just what we have to do. It's what I have to do, to find my truth and to live fearlessly from that truth. And that's really what my goal is here in healing. So thanks again, Greg. I'm looking forward to continuing the conversation.
Too. Again, thank you so much. And thank you to everyone for attending today. And please look for the interview up on Fireside Adoptee's YouTube channel. So this will conclude in just a second here, the recording portion, and then we will open up to questions. So you'll hear the announcement of the recording ending now.